So, hello Saga and welcome.
I managed to arrive. There were some difficulties.
There are some technical problems. Sorry about them. So nice to see you here, Saga.
Yeah,
So,
nice to be here.
yeah, Saga is a social worker and a student of social psychology. And she's doing her master thesis. Well, you can tell more about your master thesis, but it's very interesting. We've been having many online and phone and face-to-face conversations about the topic, and Saga is also a very warm-hearted person who takes care of the well-being and stuff of people. So please, Saga.
Thank you, Lumi. You're a very warm-hearted person too.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. So I think we're all here. Maybe somebody's being directed, but I will start slow. So I think I'll go for the screen sharing right away, and just to see that that works. There we are. And then you can adjust so that you can see, if you want to, my face, and then also the screen sharing. You can probably manage that. But anyway, so hello, my name is Saga Lydén, and as Lumi said, I am a social worker and a student of social psychology. And what I will be talking about today is, as the title says, managing a non-heterosexual orientation in a heteronormative church. So disclaimer to begin with. This is a topic that I've engaged in as part of my thesis work. And as I've applied a discursive approach to my thesis work, that's also something I need to and want to include in this presentation. If this is not a familiar concept, do not worry. I'll try to explain in greater detail any more academic concepts or terminology later on. My goal is to not make this too much into an academic presentation. However, of course, it is based on my thesis work, so I'll try to find a balance there. And feel free to write questions at any time. I won't be seeing them until later, but please write the questions right away, so then you'll remember. And yeah, and I think Lumi will be moderating. Yes. Yeah, you'll keep track of that. Awesome. All right. So yes, to start with, I wanted to wow, can I do? Yes. I wanted to provide you with a bit of context so that you know why I am here talking about this topic. Yes, I've been a social worker since 2005. I worked with all kinds of different groups of people and different units. My longest stint was in psychiatry, psychiatric wards, and outpatient clinics. And then also during my involvement in evangelical free churches, I've spoken with a lot of people engaged also in lay ministry, prayer ministry, soul care, that type of thing. So I feel like I've gained a kind of a broad perspective on issues of well-being and life management, also human suffering and challenges, that type of thing. And then I have an advanced certificate in biblical leadership from Vineyard Institute. So somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess you could say it's a type of Bible college diploma. So for 2 years, I studied theology and practical church ministry and leadership. And among other things, I learned a bit about how many different ways you can construct different biblical interpretation and theological arguments. And I guess formally, you could say this qualifies me for some type of ministry work or church leadership within evangelical free churches, or at least the Vineyard movement. But this was not my path. As you can see, I started my master's studies in social sciences at Helsinki University at the beginning of last year. And upon graduation, by the end of this year, I promise that I will become a social psychologist. And this is my track professionally in life, at least for the time being. So this being said, I needed to moving into doing my thesis, I needed to choose a topic. that obviously was something that you could study within social psychology, as that's my major. And I still wanted to, even though I didn't want to pursue church ministry or church work, that part is sort of still, it feels irrelevant to me personally, and I wanted to incorporate that in some way. And I started to reflect on things that where sort of social psychology and then this well, faith communities, church life, where they could intersect. And then I started thinking on something that had been on my mind lately before that, the conditions for social acceptance within these faith communities or this faith tradition. It's an evangelical faith tradition. And a lot of that then revolved around, well, like sort of who is who is accepted within, but who is like accepted to which degree, like more or less. There are levels maybe, and so who is a full-fledged member that is okay for ministry and even leadership, but who perhaps isn't, like who is barely allowed to make coffee and why. And obviously then I reflected on these reasons for like personal attributes, choices, opinions, and also mainly then the groups that might be affected by this kind of belonging or not belonging, depending on. So I thought about women, specifically in ministry, divorcees, and gender and sexual minorities, that kind of thing. And then I simply honed in on those who experience same-sex attraction, or then identify as non-heterosexual within this faith tradition, these heteronormative Christian faith communities. Many reasons. One was that it sort of felt like something I could grasp within this type of study. All right. So excuse my rustling of papers here at the same time. So anyway, there was also, like, I looked at the type of studies that have been done before, and it was very much a type of, well, what does the clergy think, or that kind of, or stories that weren't really grounded in any kind of scientific or academic research. And there wasn't much on people reflecting on this kind of position, like, oh, I'm same-sex attracted or non-heterosexual, and this is my experience. So I sort of wanted to introduce more of that into academic research as well. And I might need to explain my use of terminology here, because well, I'm sure a lot of you know that within this type of faith tradition, many people who experience mainly same-sex attraction still choose to identify as heterosexual. So it's not necessarily that everybody will be claiming a non-heterosexual orientation. So it's a bit of a, there are a lot of people who relate very differently to their sexual orientation. And I realized that it was maybe a bit ambitious for my small study, but I really did want to include different people in my study, because I wanted to show the diversity in how people manage this situation differently, being attracted to persons of the same sex, but then being in a heteronormative faith community. And one of the reasons I really wanted to highlight this, because I felt that, like, people both inside and outside these faith communities really didn't know basically how many problems and challenges and also suffering goes into this, especially if they're not directly affiliated with this phenomenon. So yeah. And then, of course, the research question you can see on the bottom is what I then formulated, so that it would go into my academic and methodological theoretical approach. So I will explain identity negotiation later on, what exactly that means. So please bear with me. Right. So to give you an idea of what exactly my study was, like it was a qualitative study with open-ended interviews, and qualitative means that it was a small study. I only interviewed 7 people, but that is yeah, so obviously you can't make any generalized conclusions. You can't draw any of those from my material, from my findings, but hopefully it will then provide a more deeper insight in what kind of reflections and identity negotiations, if you will, persons might be facing when they are same-sex attracted within these faith communities. And yes, there was, I received help both from former and current members of the board of Journey Finland and from Burden to Resource, which Lumi and Peik are a part of, to find people to interview, because I wanted to have a diverse sample of participants. And these interviews, you see, well, the timeline and sort of the themes that were present in this study. And for me, perhaps most importantly, you see that I've just finished my analysis, so that's why I can share some of my findings with you. There was a lot of material, and basically what I did, I then transcribed, so I wrote down word for word all the interview material, and then I looked for the things that were appropriate according to my theoretical and methodological approach, which before going to findings, I have to just get into a little bit. So my approach was rooted in critical discursive psychology, which in turn is rooted in social constructionism. And to summarize very shortly, language is center stage. So the idea is that in conversation, in discourse, we construct reality and our perception of it. We construct, we reconstruct, we negotiate. So when we have conversation, that's where we kind of define and construct our reality. And then the concepts that are used to sort of break this down, you can see here, and I'll explain all of them in so many words. So firstly, interpretative repertoires, that's a tough word, but it's sort of a mini discourse. So you could say it's like a concept that's understood in a specific social context or a social group. So I have here yes, I use the example here, for example, of homosexuality as a sin. So that's understood in various social and religious contexts, and nobody has to sort of break that down to explain why. And it's obviously it's constructed somehow originally, like by biblical interpretation or tradition and that kind of thing, and people sort of know, and you don't have to explain. And this is a premise you operate on in conversation. You don't necessarily have to express that. Right. And right then, ideological dilemmas. So those would surface when you believe something and then the reality doesn't really connect with that. So for instance, you might believe, perhaps because you're a part of that faith tradition and you have your religious conviction, you do believe that homosexuality is a sin, but then you experience same-sex attraction and you want to engage in romantic relationships with a person of the opposite sex, and then this ideological dilemma surfaces. Well, this doesn't really go together, and then usually that leads to some negotiation, and yeah, more of that later. And then subject position. So that's something that can be offered to you or almost assigned to you, but also you can also choose to claim or accept a subject position. It's sort of like an identity within a conversation or discourse. So for example, let's say you're having a conversation with just one person in your church, and you you present that, okay, I am gay, like not just same-sex attracted, I'm gay. And then the person is like, oh no, you should repent on this, and you should renounce. This is not like a valid identity, like that's sinful, and you know, like that you might have to worry about your salvation depending on what type of church you're in. And then you can choose to like agree, and you accept that, yes, and then you can like negotiate another position depending on if you renounce or don't. Or then you can even sort of contest the whole position, like, no, I don't agree with that, like this is not how I feel, that this is not my position, I'm not hellbound. Yeah, so, and this type of negotiation does, maybe not this directly, but on some level, it happens in a lot of faith communities. And an important concept to elaborate on is sort of the relationship and the power dynamic between the discourse and its producers. Because if you have a larger discourse or an interpretive repertoire, if you will, that states something, for example, that homosexuality is a sin, then you as an individual producer don't have the same power to change that discourse. So the individual producer of the discourse can gradually and together perhaps with others make a shift, but it's not the discourse or interpretive repertoire still has sort of more power. So that's an important aspect of this whole thing. Right. So analyzing my material, I discerned mainly 4 different interpretative repertoires, and they all related to homosexuality. This was the most prominent that rose up, even though I had different interviews. And I should explain now, regardless of the personal conviction of the interviewees, they related their understanding, and this is, they sort of construct these repertoires not always based on what they themselves believe, but what they understand to be the situation in their faith community or their previous faith community, because there was also a development of their narratives where sometimes they had changed their position, and yeah, so bear with me. Anyway, so the first one, as I already used as an example to some extent, is the idea and the concept of homosexuality as a sin. Now, this was recognized by everybody, and of course, this it meant that homosexuality was seen as something detrimental, and goodness, like it was something that you might be punished for. It was morally reprehensible. It might even hurt other people. You might curse others with your homosexuality, and it might be, or cause illnesses for them. So it was seen as bad in this repertoire. However, there was variation. Some, depending on their faith community or their development of their standpoints, while within this concept of homosexuality being sinful, they might still have felt that they are still saved. They're not like hellbound, but it is a sin, or that they're still accepted, but it's still a sin. So that that arose within that interpretative repertoire. And the main ideological dilemma, quite obviously, was then how to reconcile this faith, your own faith conviction of homosexuality being a sin, with then same-sex attraction. So how to make that compute. And the positions I kind of already went into there that were offered or claimed or then sinful or even faithless. Some thought they would have to give up their whole faith, or they would lose their faith if they were gay, or that they were hellbound, that they should be punished, that they were a threat to others. But then again, there was also this, maybe I'm still saved, or I'm still saved, or I'm still accepted, right? And then the second repertoire was, I named it Fixing Homosexuality ? Because, well, I should explain. So this repertoire was constructed very much due to the sort of negative framing of homosexuality within this faith tradition or these faith communities. it was seen as something not part of the sort of divine plan, something not that God didn't intend, and that should be and could be corrected somehow. So I don't forget anything very central. Right. Yeah. So basically, within this repertoire, same-sex attraction was viewed as something that you shouldn't embrace, that you should rather like suppress or manage, or either then by sexual orientation change efforts, or celibacy, or regardless of, well, or then maybe just marrying a person of the opposite sex, regardless, as an act of faith. So these ideas existed within this repertoire. And then there was very much a link here between same-sex attraction and brokenness, like something, and brokenness, for those who aren't familiar with the use of language in a lot of these faith communities, a brokenness is kind of a word you use for maybe the effects of traumatic life events on a person, that's like brokenness inside a person. And so then the premise in prayer ministry or conversion or reparative therapy or just any type of sexual orientation change effort is that this by fixing this brokenness, some specific brokenness which is linked to the emergence of same-sex attraction, this or gender dysphoria, depending on what you're dealing with there, that when you sort of heal this trauma or fix this brokenness, then like the same-sex attraction will subside. So that's the premise. And so I think the question mark in this for this repertoire is a nod to the fact that even those, well, I had a small sample, so mind you, not to generalize, but like while all three of the people I interviewed who were sort of in this track still, managing or fixing same-sex attraction or homosexual tendencies, they felt they had success and they were happy, but that didn't mean that they would have actually, in the sense, been successful, that they rid themselves completely of same-sex attraction. And it was more like a success in maybe managing that or something. So that's the question mark. And then, of course, then the four people who developed more affirming approaches to non-heterosexual orientation, they were not able to make this work for them. They were not successful. A bit like the others, they were not successful in being rid of their same-sex attraction, but also a lot of it was that their well-being was too much affected by these efforts, and they, yeah. So then initially everybody had and everybody still had an understanding of the positioning that was being offered, that you would, if you kind of go on this track and you don't work on the same-sex attraction to remove that, then you'll be like, you'll lose your faith, or you should give up your faith, you'll be hellbound. But then there was a very positive connection between, like, even if you're just engaged with in sexual orientation change efforts, a position is like you're on the road to transformation, and that was always linked with like being accepted, the position of accepted. That's okay, regardless of your success there, you're fine. And then, of course, there was also a position of already transformed, which is more like an ideal, like this person of faith that you should claim. And I don't know, maybe sometimes people believe that they did what that was more like in the moment. It didn't really last. And then avoiding responsibility was for those who sort of gave up. And that was like frowned upon, like you should at least keep the effort going. Right. So maybe I'm expecting perhaps more on that in the discussion segment. I'll try to leave ample time for. And then everybody that participated in the study reported some sort of social negative social repercussions due to same-sex attraction or non-heterosexual orientation. So this repertoire is then named homosexuality as a bearer of social stigma and exclusion. The interviewees were afraid of being, they felt shame and they were afraid to be shamed. They were afraid of being socially stigmatized. They were socially stigmatized, and they were afraid of being excluded. And they did report experiences of that, even to the point of excommunication. So this was a strong repertoire that also followed in my interview material. And even those who felt that, of course, God accepts them and it's fine as long as you keep this social, or sexual orientation change efforts ongoing and active, you're accepted, but they were still afraid. Like, nobody wanted to really share openly in their church to everybody that, yes, I do have same-sex attraction, but I'm doing this, like I'm engaging in sexual orientation change efforts, so it's all good. There was still shame very heavily linked to that. Yeah, so those are then also, I think the positioning here is quite self-evident. Like accepted was mainly in relation to certain specific groups where you could share that maybe they were also dealing with the same issues, and you could share there. But then within the larger faith tradition, it was more along the lines of shame and social stigma. And an interesting positioning was the struggle to like find a church home. Like, there was a lot of this some sort of talk on, okay, so I accept myself, but it doesn't connect with my church, my faith community. I don't feel that they accept me, but this is my faith tradition, and I want to find this type of church, but I really can't. So it was like a homelessness and a sort of mission impossible, and then finding like a community. There are maybe some sort of secret communities even in the evangelical or heteronormative faith communities, where people have found each other and sort of put a spin on that, and they can accept each other, but it's very hard to find maybe a church home in your own tradition, faith tradition, while dealing with this. And then, like I said, there were different ways in my sample of interviewees of dealing with same-sex attraction, and there were also some that had more affirming approaches. However, this was very much conditional and conditioned. Like the affirming approaches were very much relating still to this like heteronormative faith community, that church. So it was a bit more like, okay, so homosexuality is okay regardless of something, or then even like the so-called affirmation might have been like, okay, well, homosexuality is wrong, but hey, like some of the things that people in my faith community engaging are equally or even more morally reprehensible. So then it's like, okay, by comparison. And I think one of the very important issues here in this repertoire was the question of equality. Am I equal? Sinful or not, am I equal? And I think even in this repertoire of, okay, I think it's somehow okay, but I still feel unequal within my faith community. I'm still a stigmatized outsider. I'm still struggling to feel like at home or find another home. But then there were accounts of I feel completely accepted and equal, but those were mainly for people who had already left their faith communities. Yeah. So this is maybe more than something that's for the discussion, hopefully. And these methods and or strategies for managing your same-sex attraction or non-heterosexual orientation is not really something that was relevant for my my methodological or theoretical perspective, but I felt like it absolutely was there, very present in my interview material. And I thought it would be very relevant for this presentation and for this type of seminar. And I think it's an important topic. Like, what are the strategies that then you have to manage? And as you can see here, some of these don't seem very healthy or sustainable over time. And then some of that might seem more healthy. They might not be available or seem available to a person if you feel like you actually want to just change your theology or leave that faith community, but then you've been kind of convinced that even a small tweak of your theology and you're kind of hellbound, that's heresy. Or if you leave your church, then you might not be able to have the same relationship to your friends and family anymore. So there are big questions here. And yeah. So this is like the strategy slide, and I can still keep the slides up, but as we move into the discussion, these are some of the topics that I would really love to hear from you on. Like, what are, in your opinion, like good and healthy ways of dealing with the same-sex attraction or non-heterosexual orientation in a faith community that doesn't really have a positive view on that? And then this one question I've thought about a lot is issues with overt normativity. Like, how do you create dialogue and kind of discuss that? Can we have different approaches? Can we be different in the same community? Is that possible? Or are we just, if we kind of push our point of view, how can we do that without like pushing other into a more defensive position? And then, of course, like the many ethical considerations and issues relating to well-being within like sexual orientation change efforts. Yeah, then I have a lot of references. I can send I can give out some references later if people are interested, but yeah, that's it for my monologue. I hope that we get some conversation going. Lumi, do we have already something in the comments? Or I don't know how many we are. Can people just open their mics or do the hand raising function?
We don't have any questions yet, but you can write them in the chat section, and then you can raise your hand or just open your mic if nobody else is speaking and start speaking. So please, the platform is yours.
Right. And I'm going to try to...
So there was, first comment was, this was a very interesting presentation. Thank you, Saga. Yes, I agree.
All right. Maybe I can I stop sharing my screen, or how do I see more?
Yes.
Like,
go there, share screen. You can see
share.
Yes.
All right. And
then I think because we are only 16 people here, we can start opening our cameras and let's see if it works. You don't have to if you don't want to, but you can.
Right.
Thank you.
Gallery. Now I see you. Or you're closed. You're closed cameras. That's okay. Yeah. All right. Anybody? Yeah, like I'm surprised. I was sort of expecting a lot of comments, but maybe it's such a heavy topic. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, perhaps I can start. First of all, a great presentation, Saga. Thank you. It was a pleasure to get to listen to it. And I'm really interested to, like, first of all, get to, if you share your PowerPoint, to get to see the references, because I am doing similar type of research currently. So, well, research, study, whatever. I was really interested in these more affirming type of positions in your interviews, just like how how prevalent was it, and just like how these sort of affirming voices came through in your presentation, and that all?
Well, like I said, people were like in different stages of dealing with their sexuality and sexual orientation, and I think the affirming was sort of very much, it sort of came like this sort of outbreak that, wait, like, am I really the worst of the worst? Like this is not like, hello. Like, sort of this indignation that, wait a minute, like this is like, why is sexuality and my type of sexuality like the biggest issue that people need to somehow repent of, like, and even when they were kind of still in that kind of well, kind of having that kind of position that, okay, perhaps homosexuality is a sin, but why is it worse than everything else, sort of in practice, even though supposedly it isn't? But why am I like the one who has to account for everything and my sinful issues? And I think that was a breakout point for some, like that kind of narrative, like, no, I don't feel like these people who are gossiping and not including me, or not being transparent, I don't or like, you know, cheating on their spouses, I don't feel like they're better than me. Like, okay, maybe I'm sinful, but they're also not perfect. And then of course some then completely just revised theology and felt like they're allowed to pursue whichever type of you know, intimate partner relationship or family that they wanted, and they felt that God was okay with that. And of course that was a big affirmation for them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know, that was part of it. And then, well, I mean, you know, everybody, I forgot to mention, everybody was a professing Christian, and yeah, they were very that was important to all of my participants. And one person had a moment where she actually felt like God was telling her that you're okay. And so personal conviction, like in your personal relationship with God, there's both theoretical reflection on theology, but then personal experiences and, you know, religious and spiritual experience that would push you to, you know, feel affirmation or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we have to live with, that people get spiritual experiences in different direction. Some get a strong spiritual experience saying this is wrong and I should never engage in this, and some get a different experience like this is absolutely okay, and finally I'm okay and I can do this. And that's also one of the questions with the overt normativity. Like, do we fight very hard to negate other people's experiences? Yeah.
That's a good question to leave out as hanging here. Maybe someone else can like comment on it.
Does anybody want to grab on it? Ruri?
Hey, it is I. Yeah, I have been, you know, kind of pondering a similar question as well, being a, you know, aspiring social worker myself. You know, I often ask, what is the best way to approach people and trying to, you know, perhaps, you know, make them understand or realize that, you know, what they might believe in is, you know, or what they might be is not inherently wrong in any way, despite the, you know, discourse or stigma that comes with, you know, homosexuality or, you know, deviation from the norms in that such. And at least I think, you know, one method that could be relatively effective is just to let these kind of people meet, you know, homosexual people and people who are different from them, and, you know, be in contact with them, you know, and such, because at least in my opinion, a lot of the, these sort of stigmas and, these caricatures emerge from, these sort of, how do I explain it? Like, straw men that we have in our heads, like, oh, these, gays are so evil and satanic or something, or they're so sinful because, that's the, what I've, heard being told to me and stuff, and I've developed this, image in my head of what they're like and such. And I feel like one of the better ways to counteract that is to just, give them a chance to meet someone who is like that, who's not a straw man, who's a real person with feelings and, emotions and such. And, and it doesn't always work. Some people are very, very insistent upon their own interpretations and view, but I feel like that could potentially show like, oh, no, this, this is people who are different from me are still, people. And maybe, I shouldn't immediately, be so vitriolic or hateful towards them, because, they're still a person, and that might over time make like, well, maybe, God still, God doesn't think this is a sin, or it doesn't make sense that God would like make these perfectly normal people and then damn them to hell just because they're slightly different from me. So yeah, it's much more harder to try to hate a group that you actually have met and interacted with.
That's a good point, and I very recently, having taken part in lectures on social psychology and intergroup relations, I think it's definitely, that's a good point, like representation and being exposed to like and interacting with different people. It's not just getting to know, but also the way you interact with. And if it's very sort of people pushing each other and trying to convince each other, that might not help at all. But if it's people genuinely getting to know each other and actually having to deal with each other on very day-to-day basis and in everyday life kind of situations, it's, yeah, there's a different result. But I think also we have to kind of also be careful not to ourselves push anyone, depending on, regardless of what their opinion or orientation is, that to push anyone and sort of just invite people to take part of different perspectives, and then respectfully perhaps leave well enough alone. If one thing, then of course a larger debate is one thing, and people marching and protesting and stuff, that's a different thing. But I think with people, like human beings, just other fellow human beings, to always have that that kind of respectful approach. Andy.
Hi, so I'm Andy. Hi everybody. So thank you so much, Saga, for this presentation, and also thank you for the invitation. I came because I got your Facebook ad.
Awesome.
And yeah, so just to say, I mean, I've led Journey Finland for many years, so it was great to hear that you had interviewed some of the people from there. And yeah, I look forward to any ways in which we can make it better for people who are struggling in some way and have not been affirmed, not been recognized, or haven't been given proper counsel. I mean, that's something that we really want to see improved, and we want to help everybody who possibly comes. Just to mention one thing, though, you mentioned early in your study, you said that you couldn't find other studies that had been done in Finland, and I was just a little surprised by that, because having led this organization for many years, actually almost every year there are 3 or 4 people who produce a study on what has been done. So I just encourage you as you look further, you will find there are plenty of studies.
I guess that's sort of it depends on, there are some studies, but then like fitting specific scientific or academic criteria, that's tough. That's a bit tough. But I would love to get a list from you if I missed something. That would be amazing.
Well, just to encourage you that there are those studies out there.
Yeah.
But the main point, I think, what the takeaway that I got from you was that you saw from those 7 people that a lot of them seem to have a great amount of difficulty, because they're either not affirmed or they're rejected, or their theology or whatever. So it seems to me that there is an area here where there seems to be a lot more talking is needed. And as Rurik was saying, they're meeting people and getting together and hearing each other's stories. I 100% affirm that's the only way forward that I can see, so that people can learn to accept those who have a different opinion for themselves, or a different experience for themselves, or who experience a group, as you said, faith communities, as you said, they experience a different one. Others, I think it's really important that there is more conversation, and that people hear some of the arguments that have been put for certain viewpoints, and the arguments that have been put from the other side. I think then people can make a more informed decision. But as you say, there are lots of people who belong to groups who hear just one position or one viewpoint and feel very oppressed by it. So just to say that.
Thanks, Andy. Anybody else?
We got a comment from Anders Blomberg.
Right.
After taking part of Professor Diarmaid McGullow's TV series of Sex and the Church 2015, where he presents a lot of new information for me. For example, there were a lot of homosexuality within the monks at the earlier 11th century. He had a lot of new aspects of where the morality of sexuality have been through the time, and it was an interesting presentation you had, Saga.
Yeah, that's a
historical perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective. I mean, in a sense, and that's also something that some of my I guess similarly, some of my interviewees had sort of picked up upon, that right now this is the trend in their faith communities and in their faith tradition for biblical interpretation and the praxis, and it's really like, if the further back you have a lot of variety, and just a while back divorcees were like shunned in a sense, and in some churches maybe still, and it's it might seem in this moment that some issue is so rigid and so strong, but then you go back a bit and it's been the same with another issue, and the discussion and the praxis for that issue has changed dramatically. So it's interesting what we think is so absolute, and how theological standpoints seem so absolute, but then how quickly they actually change. And to me, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah, but I think Elena had her hand up.
Yes, thanks. You mentioned these different methods for managing a non-heterosexual orientation in a heteronormative church. And I was wondering that, well, I think usually a church or a faith community has maybe one way of approaching queer people who are part of their community or come to them, but LGBTQI people can have very different approaches to their sexuality or gender identity. As you mentioned, one can decide that, okay, celibacy is right for me, but someone else cannot do that. It would be very harmful for their well-being. So when there might be LGBTQI people in a same church, in the same congregation, who have chosen different methods for managing their orientation, it could be difficult. At first, it could be difficult for them to approach kind of each other's convictions, and it could be also a bit baffling for the straight and cisgender people around them to kind of how to deal with this situation when there are queer people who have these very different ways of approaching this question in their lives.
Thanks. And I think one of the problems definitely can be that these different approaches are definitely ranked. Like that one is much better than the other, and then the one who sort of does more poorly with the kind of desired approach, and they don't kind of meet the expectations, they might have much greater negative social repercussions and also effects on their well-being. So I think definitely what Andy was kind of trying to speak for here is that you have to kind of make room for different people and for everybody to feel affirmed and somehow be a part of, even though they're not like managing their sexuality or orientation in sort of the most desired way. Yeah. So I think we're closing in on our time. Anybody, there's time for maybe some comment or question still?
If I could quickly say something in regards to the, chat comment about, the homosexuality between monks and stuff, and how these, things in like biblical text or stuff hasn't been as concrete as many would believe. I'm not sure how, accurate or, truthful this is, but I've been hearing a lot or reading a lot about how, there's this, text that's often floated around by, people who are against homosexuality and stuff about, a man should not lie with another man as he would with his wife. And that's many people have pointed to that as a reason to, be against homosexuality. Mm-hmm. Well, from what I've heard, that in some of the more earlier, writings of the Bible or that verse, it's instead of a man, it says that a man should not lie with a boy, as if his wife, more condemning pedophilia than homosexuality. And I think that's might be a very good example how over time, as the cultures have developed and norms have kind of changed over time, how these texts and whatnot have been very much more different over the years than many would have assumed. And so in a sense, these texts or statements that have been made in the past aren't as concrete and as definitive, and in my opinion should not be isn't the best way to try to make your argument for or against any sort of people or group, since religion and other sorts of stuff is a constantly evolving thing. So yeah.
Right. And I think maybe sort of to tie things together, I think there will always be different theological arguments, and I think what then especially church leaders might want to think about is whether or not those are used against somebody or to the benefit of somebody, and how to kind of shepherd and love people the best way possible, regardless of theological approach. So
absolutely.
Yeah, are we now at the end of our time? I see Lotte kind of came in here too. Yeah.
Yes, it's 12 o'clock and we're going to have a 1 hour lunch break. But I would just read the last comments.
Oh.
An interesting book, In the Closet of the Vatican, Power, Homosexuality, Hypocrisy. So copy paste this if you want to read it. And then related to last comment, the theologist Jesper Svartvik has a book on it too from the Church of Sweden perspective. Thank you, Saga, a great presentation. Thank you, Saga, for your presentation. I was wondering if the different people you interviewed had different ages and if there were differences in their responses, understanding the read that generalized data cannot be drawn from your sample.
Yeah, we're out of time. There's a lot I could say, but they were different ages, and 3 that identified as women, 4, goodness, 3 or 4 as men. But anyway, so and then yeah, and different ages. So it was definitely like, my idea was that since it's such a small sample and you can't draw any conclusion, let's have everybody be different. That was and there was variation, but I will publish the thesis will be public, and you will, I will account for the my sample of interviewees in greater detail, in my written thesis.
Okay, thank you very much, Saga. This was so interesting. Yes, and comment from Late. When you finish, you can leave the room. Then you'll get back to the main room where we'll continue in 1 hour.